Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are back with another brand new Jurassic World Rebirth release. As you can see, we've got the final of the new Sega figures. This is the Mosasaurus, and it looks pretty cool. So one figure we had from this line was amazing if you ask me, the Spino. Then we had the T-Rex, which was pretty okay, but not absolutely blowing my mind. Let's see how the final one goes, so we know if this line was overall a success or a mixed bag. You can see the packaging looks pretty nice. Again, pretty much the standard as far as what we've seen the entire way through for these Sega figures. Same thing going on with the side with the Rebirth logo. You got a shot of the Mosasaurus, which here kind of looks like it's slightly differently positioned, interestingly enough. And then here on the side, you can see the base is actually very different on this one. We had like a tan for the last two. This time we've got the ocean blue going on, but it's a pretty cool look for the Mosasaurus, I must say. I really quite like the way that they've gone with this one when it comes to the display and the fact that it kind of has like the Mosasaurus jumping up out of the water backwards like we actually do see it kind of doing in Rebirth. So let's go ahead, pop this box open and check it out. So here is our Mosasaurus figure from Sega, and that thing is, first of all, not in the screen correctly, but that is really nicely done, honestly. Definitely impressive, like the Spino, one of those instances where you bring it in and you're just like, wow, that's pretty nice overall. The only thing, again, with this one I can see is maybe the details muted compared to some of the others. I've seen a lot of the Rebirth Mosasaurus figures having like a lot of detail added to it, whereas this one has a lot more of a smoothed out kind of look to it compared to what I was expecting. But one thing that is really cool about this one that I do definitely like, and it's something I had seen on the Furyu version, but I feel like it's better utilized here, is that it has a gloss coat. So it has that really nice genuine wet look to it, but the Furyu version was way too glossy, whereas this one is like that perfect amount of glossiness, which is a massive plus for this figure. So I'm going to go ahead and readjust the camera here just for a moment and then bring it in to take a closer look. So if we start in the head sculpt here, you can see the head sculpt looks pretty good. You've definitely got a nice visual here overall showing off the style and appearance of the Mosasaurus from Rebirth. We could see the eye is painted with a yellow, maybe slightly sloppily, and of course also has a black pupil. We have a dark tone that moves over the head here, and I think that's nicely applied for sure. But just like I was saying, again, the detail is kind of muted, like you don't see a whole lot of really impressive fine detail here in the head of the Mosasaurus. The mouth, just like with the other two models in this line, is wide open. We do have the skin stretching here on the side of the mouth. As we move down to the lower jaw, you can see we have a lighter tone down here. Also a dark tip there for the lower jaw, something you don't see a whole lot on the Mosasaurus figures from Rebirth. I haven't seen that on any of the others, I think, so just a little extra paintwork there. On the inside of the mouth, we can see the teeth are all sculpted out, and for the first time the entire way through this line, they actually look pretty good. They're not sloppy that I can really see, and we do even have that extra row of teeth on the inside of the mouth, but obviously that was a separate piece added later on, and they didn't bother trying to hide the seams because these Sega figures wouldn't be complete without a whole bunch of seams on them. The detail elsewhere on the inside of the mouth looks alright, but it's not super mind-blowing by any means. But we've got the tongue and everything. Nice wet look for the inside of the mouth as well, and again a pinkish tone in there. I think it all looks fairly decent, but as you move down, you do have a seam right here where these two areas connect. Obviously that's two separate pieces that are applied, and clearly the fins of the Mosasaurus are also applied separately because you can see a seam moving down for those, and the seam does run the entire way through, which is unfortunate because it also means that the transition between these two colors isn't as smooth as it could be. There is a little bit of a variation of color here that kind of falls along that area though. As you move down to the underside of the Mosasaurus, you can see there's like some creasing, so there is some okay detail. Very strong wet look again as you move down through, and a very bright sort of a white tone. We do have kind of like a grayish tone for the undersides of the fins. They look decent as far as the detail goes. As you let the light hit it, you can really see the detail and appreciate it, but again, seems kind of muted overall for a Sega figure. Almost has like a lighter gray as we move up here to the top of the fins, but you can see almost like a little bit of a jagged edge to the fins as well, which is a nice dose of realism, I would say. We do have the patterns moving along the back, which is definitely great to see. Kind of like a black striping that follows along, and that of course does look really nice on the figure. But as you move through, again, we can see, again, some slight texturing as we let the light hit it, but it's not all that mind-blowing. There are those bumpy sort of osteoderm-like scales moving along the back of the Mosasaurus as well, which is nice to see. And then we lead down, and obviously this is the Mosasaurus jumping up out of the water, and we can very clearly see the water kind of just bursting out of the ocean here as the Mosasaurus does so. They did a great job on the actual sculpting of the water. It does look like genuine waves in the ocean. It also has a beautiful translucent blue and a nice dry brushing with some white that helps to give it the look of, again, the waves and water splashing. So that looks really good. The base itself, again, like I stated, does have that nice blue rather than the tan that we had seen on the others, but it also has a translucent look, which I think is also pretty cool for the figure. If you turn the Mosasaurus around, take a look from the other side, you're not going to see a whole lot of difference, honestly. This one is pretty cut and dry on both sides, the same style. There is a slight tilt to the body toward its left, but overall, it doesn't have a major different look from one side to the other. The only other area that we have is the tail sticking out, and here you can see a really dark grayish tone for the tail. That's strong gloss coat. Man, that area is a little bit too glossy, I would say. But we also have a little bit of the water down here, just that little extra area right there as we turn it around. You can see a little variation of color as we actually have the light gray moving through the back of the tail over here. But it all looks pretty decent. I will say, by far, my favorite model from this line is still the Spinosaurus. And I think that was probably the best way to start because we started out really strong. And I feel like they almost declined as we went on. Like, the Spino was great, the T-Rex was pretty darn nice, and the Mosasaurus is also okay, but not amazing. But as far as the size goes, for a height, you were looking at around 6 inches or a little bit over. Actually, I'd say about 15.5 centimeters to the top of the lower jaw. And I don't know what else we could really do as far as a measurement goes. Maybe like a sideways measurement on the base. That's about 5.5 inches or 14 centimeters. Not much in the way of, measurements you can really do with this one. But for a size comparison, there's Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, Robert Muldoon, and the Collect Day Human Being next to our Sega Mosasaurus. And you can see again, it's got a pretty decent size to it, but it's not gigantic. It's another one of those instances where if you want a really nicely sized and conveniently sized Rebirth model to go on like your work desk or something like that, this is definitely a pretty fun one to go with because although it's impressively sized, it's not gigantic. And then just in case you wanted to see a comparison with the Furyu version, here's the Furyu Rebirth Mosasaurus as well. Obviously, the Sega version is actually slightly larger. Then we've got a few comparisons with the other Sega figures in the line. Here is the Spino, which we can see is slightly smaller than the Mosasaurus, as well as the T-Rex, which again is definitely a little bit smaller than our Mosasaurus figure. We've also got the Dominion T-Rex, again Rexy, which we can see is again another Sega figure next to the Mosasaurus. And they're fairly similar in size, but we've obviously got a lot more length on the T-Rex. And then one final comparison as we have a standard Mattel Velociraptor next to the Mosasaurus, again to kind of give you one final idea of the size. So this Jurassic World Rebirth Sega Mosasaurus figure is pretty cool. It's definitely a fun collectible, no doubt about that. Do I think there was, a little bit more room for improvement? Absolutely. I feel like they could have done a better job, especially considering the track record of the Sega figures. Some of them have been honestly mind-blowing when it comes to the sculpt and everything, and this one is absolutely a little lacking when it comes to the fine detail department. Very washed out, I would say, when it comes to a lot of the detail. But that said, when you take a step back, it's still a really cool looking model. Definitely has a very impressive and attention-grabbing look. I feel like they captured the likeness of the Mosasaurus pretty well. They've also given it a nice pose that looks a little bit different from some of the other Mosasaurus figures that are out there, but also is, of course, something that kind of like, screams Rebirth, because we do see the Mosasaurus jumping out of the water quite a bit in that film when it is making its appearance, so that's nice. I feel like the tones of color on this might be slightly off compared to the way that we actually see it on screen, so that's something to consider, but the overall appearance to it, again, is definitely unique and interesting enough to kind of look past some of the other downsides to the figure. I also like the fact that we do have a gloss coat on it, giving it the wet look, and it's not quite as bad as we had seen on the Furyu version, but it's also nice to see the patterning moving down along this one, which is something that the Furyu version was lacking. The water effect is really cool. I really like the splashes of the water and everything, and I love the fact that they gave the base the same sort of translucent bluish tone, which I think really suits the Mosasaurus as a whole. And we do, of course, have seams on this one, but that's just to be expected, I would say, at this point when it comes to the Sega figures. If you are interested, just like with the others, check eBay. That's where I purchased mine. I will try to find a link to include in the description. If the seller that I purchased it from is still selling them, I will include a link straight to that seller. If not, again, you should be able to grab it fairly easily from somebody else, as they were pretty much all over the place when I last looked. So if you do want it, definitely pick it up and like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.